Well, we're now on the cusp of the new year. The weather's cooling down, but there's still plenty to show you in the garden. Can't help but stop by the Coronilla citrina, which is such a jolly plant with its bright yellow flowers, which goes on flowering for weeks and weeks and weeks. Anyway, let's go through the door into the garden. Yeah, we're coming up to a shrubby honeysuckle with rather delicate flowers. Goes by the name of Lanissera Elizae, or Eliza's honeysuckle, if you like. Eliza was the wife of a famous French botanist and chemist called de Villemorin, and there's a sorbus Vilmorinii named after him. Anyway, this was known in the 1850s, 60s, but it was only introduced by Roy Lancaster from Hubei in China in the 1980s. And this, in fact, is the plant from his seed. Little flowers, and underwent a bit of a slaughtering session because it had got enormously big. It took a couple of years to come back to life, but it has now. But I think you can see the typical paired flowers of the honeysuckle. It is remarkable how many flowers in the winter are scented, of course. Here we see the well-known witch hazel, camellias mollis pallida, the pale yellow form. This is about a 30-something-year-old shrub that I planted. It encroaches on the path, so I have to keep slaughtering it. But it's a lovely, lovely thing and a lovely colour. I do have lots of other witch hazels which come out slightly later, especially the red ones, which are difficult to see unless you plant them where the sun shines on them, perhaps in the evening in the winter. The next shrub I'd like to show you is a Daphne from the Himalayas, Daphne bolua, and this is in its evergreen variety called Jacqueline Postel. Alan Postel was a propagator at Hilliers and picked out this variety and named it after his wife. It has the most extraordinarily heavy scent, which I can smell just standing here. And we do like to bring it into the house to get the benefit of the scent, but it has a habit of dropping its flowers inside. But if you pick it with enough buds on and just keep clearing the dropped flowers off the table under the vase, you get the benefit of that lovely heady scent. A slight word of warning, Daphnes are quite fickle and they can sometimes just die on you, but not to be taken personally, as it's something that they do. This has formed a shrub about 10 foot tall in 20-25 years, and it also suckers, so it increases its girth, and it's about 8 feet wide now. Well, we'll leave the Daphne, just come along the long border here to see something else at the end. Coming behind the Calopanax, we see the very aptly named winter sweet, another highly scented flowering shrub. But quite frankly, I had my doubts as to whether this should be in any prominent position, which is basically why I put it rather behind everything, as I have done. Some people put it against a wall, but I just wonder if it's a waste of a wall during the, unless you've got plenty of wall space. I mean, if this flowered in the spring, I don't think you'd give it a second look. But because it flowers in December and January, I think it's something which is really valuable. The scent is gorgeous, very, very sweet, and certainly lives up to its name. Individual flowers are not really much to write home about, I'm afraid. I'm rather dismissive of the thing, but the scent is gorgeous. So for the rest of the year, it's sort of hidden behind the rather jungly border, which faces south, backed by a north hedge. So it does get some shelter, which it likes, and does flower well, and can be enjoyed during the winter, and then forgotten about when everything burgeons forth in the spring. Yeah, we're coming up to a much more well-known shrub, a Mahonia. Another sweet scented shrub for winter. Nice bold leaves and nice new growth on the bits I've chopped. And I have really given it quite a chopping, which you can take, of course, because it had really got out of hand. So many of the shrubs that have been here so many years do need attention, but it is a delightful shrub, and it's good value for the year with its bold leaves and, as I say, the nice new growth from time to time. Walking up from the Mahonia, I see in the distance a flash of colour from a winter flowering camellia, and that is one called Christmas rose. A lot of things labelled Christmas, this, that and the other, don't actually flower at Christmas in my experience. They often flower after Christmas. And here we have a case in point. The exception has been Yuletide, which actually had flowers at Christmas time, which was quite remarkable. I'll show you that in a minute. By way of something ridiculous, I'll show you this extremely sprawling, tangled up shrub with just a few leaves remaining, and there are several on the ground. Now, the idea of this shrub was, when I planted it about 25 years ago, actually not realizing quite how far it would spread, its attraction to me was the fact that its autumn colour was a very pale lemon, which I thought might contrast nicely with the scarlet of the acer behind. However, what I didn't bargain for was that in this climate it doesn't really go that pale yellow before it falls off. And here are some of the pale yellow leaves, almost white. The drawback is that it needs a hot summer and a cold winter to perform really well in its autumn colouring. And in fact, I saw it in Montreal Botanic Garden doing its stuff with the pale yellow, etc., etc. And the other drawback, which I couldn't foresee when I bought this thing, was the horrible smell of the leaves. I've always known it in my mind as Orixa horrida, but in fact it's Orixa japonica. Never mind, I'm going to have to do a bit of slaughtering on this one, I think. It's just stretching into the distance and it's more or less next to useless. It'll be its rarity value that I would keep it for, I think. As I mentioned earlier, here in fact is Camellia Yuletide, which did actually come out for Christmas. Rather unusually. Anyway, it did, and is a very attractive winter camellia. And behind it, still full of buds, is the white camellia Gay Sue. And she is very good value, goes on flowering for 2 months or so at least. I think we'll get a better view of the wonderful winter camellia. Now here's rather a weird thing, a rather confused bulb. This is the so-called Summer Snowflake. Yes, you heard it correctly. And here it is. It has started flowering in the winter. It's the giant summer snowflake called Gravetide Giant, tall grower. And I think Linnaeus, the father of botany and botanical nomenclature, called it the summer snowflake to differentiate it from the spring snowflake, Leucojum vernum. Even though it doesn't actually flower in the summer, it flowers in the spring, and yet here we are, it's flowering in the winter. So it's an awfully confused beast, this is. Snowflakes have this lovely little green speck on the end of their petals. Coming up that path, I see another brave soul, a lovely winter flowering bulb, winter aconite. This little ruff around the petals. Now, here's another witch hazel. This time it's an orange variety. And as I said before, you really need to have it so the sun strikes it and makes its colour obvious. Unfortunately, I put it here by the Cornus midwinter fire, which has a very similar colour, so it sort of disappears when you see it next to that. It's probably best to have it against a more neutral background than I have. This is the variety called Jelena, after Jelena de Belder. The de Belders owned Calm Tout in Belgium, where there is a massive witch hazel collection. And they have a witch hazel festival to celebrate every year. Looking away from Jelena, where we've just been, the hellebores, I notice, are coming out. Nature always thrusting forwards, never looking back. We should garden always looking forwards, perhaps even as if we're going to live forever. Spring now can't be far behind.